Hi, and welcome to the podcast. You're having tea with Alice. This week's episode is with Sarah Pappalardo, who I spoke with about parenting, life choices, and the way that you move through the world. I hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it, because I enjoyed having it a lot. If you like the podcast and want to support it, patreon.com/Alice Fraser is the place to go. I put a lot of stuff up there for free, as well as my weekly salons and weekly book club and my weekly writers meetings. If you want to write something, then you come to the writers meeting and then we have a little workshop. It's a really nice creative space, and I'm enjoying doing it very much. We're already getting people who are turning out work as a result, which makes me feel very proud and happy. Otherwise, I have a book which you can support at unbound.com. It's called The Dancy Lagarde Reader, and it is a book based on a fictional author that I made up for a fake ad section in a podcast that I had set in an alternate universe. But even if you don't know any of those things, I think it will be an absolute blast for anybody who likes reading, anybody who's ever read a romance novel or read the back of a romance novel and laughed at the ridiculous synopsis. So that's unbound.com, and look up the Dancy Lagarde Reader, or just Google Alice Fraser and Unbound and it should come up, and you can pre-order a copy because it's already been funded. I'm not asking you for your support. I don't need your support, but if you need this book, then you can also get a copy for yourself, which is just delightfully ridiculous. As somebody, I've been being told since I was 16 that I should write a book, and I've never had the confidence to do it, I think, because I was meant to be good at it, and that's kind of an intimidating thing. So walking sort of sideways into this project has felt really satisfying and silly enough to be not intimidating. So I'm excited to write it, and I'm excited for you to read it. That's unbound.com, and then just look up Alice Fraser and you can get your copy of the Dancy Lagarde Reader. That's enough of my plugging and rambling. If you're in the UK, you can see my show Twist. I'm doing work in progresses all over the place, and it'll be in Edinburgh for the Fringe Festival. Otherwise, you can probably see it on the internet at some point, and I will see you next week. You're having tea with Alice. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. You're having tea with Alice. Who are you and what are you drinking?
Ooh, great question. I'm Sarah Pappalardo, and I'm currently drinking a June Shine. I don't know if you have, it's hard kombucha.
I have never heard of a June Shine. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's great. It's just kombucha with a little bit of kick for the end of the day. I'm really, it's an advertisement for a June Shine. I apologize.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you're on theme, because kombucha is made from tea. I'm drinking a bottle of water with a straw that is way too long for the bottle.
I love it.
But what have you been up to recently, and what have you been wrestling with?
Well, my wife and I are currently in the process of purchasing our first home together, which is a milestone, and with that kind of comes the next steps of, we want to have kids, and
Wow.
have finally started looking into the actual nuts and bolts of it, of, again, having kids as a queer couple, and just how much stuff and how many questions are involved that I don't really think are a part of a heterosexual baby making process. So it's challenging.
That is super challenging. I wonder if at least some of those questions ought to be asked in the heterosexual baby making process, because I think one of the upsides plus things about queer relationships is having to ask questions about, gender roles, quote unquote, roles in a relationship, that this kind of 50-50 division of labor. How are you going to do that if it's not a default? This person takes out the bin and this person does the crying, important crying task deployed to woman part. This is, I think, potentially, partly at least, a positive thing. What are some of the questions that you're coming up against that you feel are fair or unfair?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's just a really good point about straight relationships. There's just so many questions that we've like are built into queer relationships that are like nobody thinks to ask. Like, what do you enjoy doing in the household? What don't you enjoy? But yeah, that does kind of extend to having a kid. Like, right now, even just the question of like whose sperm should we use, because we toyed with the idea of like having my half brother do it, but like even with that, like you have to get them genetic tested, you have to get a lawyer involved and sign a ton of complex legal agreements where going to a sperm bank you don't. So yeah, I mean, like, it really forces you to ask a lot of questions about like what genes mean to you. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of straight people deal with this when faced with like adopting or having kids, but it's kind of just like built into our decision making of like what genetic material do we want to kind of shove in the oven and see what comes out, right?
That is super fascinating. I just spent a week in New Zealand and made friends with this lovely lesbian couple who had 4 children together, and one of the things that they said was that in their community, the generation above them of lesbian couple mothers had legendarily a party where they just passed around a bowl of mixed sperm in order to have their, like, it was like a commune thing where they wanted to, so they just kind of rolled the dice on that. I was having a conversation in I do a salon for my Patreon people. Today, specifically, I was having this conversation with somebody who was asked to be a sperm donor for friends of his, both of whom are trans and married, and they want to have a kid, and obviously they're facing these like nuts and bolts questions now. And in the salon was somebody whose job is introducing adopted children to their biological donors. So there is, not to like give you a scare story, but there's a proportion of people who are donor children who have this real psychic wound and feel a real lack in their lives and want to have that connection with their biological parents. It's not necessarily because their adoptive families are, bad or abusive or anything. They just have this need. And that was really interesting to me because I guess I tend to assume more that like, if your parents love you, it doesn't really matter what the biology is. And I think for most people that's probably true, but there's a certain proportion of people for whom it's not true. Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. And then I was also thinking about my mother has died, and I was pregnant last year. I have a baby now. One of the things in the second trimester, I got this headache that lasted for like a week. And all I wanted to do, like, was call her and go, "Did you have a headache? What did you do about it?" Like that. And that really felt like it was missing. And that's obviously completely outside of the scope of adoptive parents. But there's something about genetics that is more than just this atavistic desire to have your children, and pass on your genes. Like I think it's too easy to completely dismiss genetics and be like, well, it'll be fine. But at the same time, I do think if you love your children enough, it doesn't really matter where they come from.
Right. So. I mean, I think, yeah, like we can all agree, like broadly, it's better for a kid to have a parent than not a parent. But there is this kind of like moral thing, like if you're a good person, of course it shouldn't matter whether you adopt or don't adopt or things like that. And I mean, it's true, it shouldn't ultimately matter, but you're right. Like there is definitely some challenges there that need to be dealt with. I don't know. And that's just why I'm seeing this as like, oh, it would be so complicated and deeply personal to find just someone I know who could just be in their life. Just so they know that kind of stuff. The thing where like I call my mom and I'm just like, oh, you and I definitely have this like random, headache or like weird autoimmune thing going on. And it's there is just like a comfort there. And you'd think like if you have the ability to do so, then like go for it, right? Just to like make things easier on your kid. Like and then adopt after that, right? But it's such a tough thing because again, that just like it just means like, oh, every time I think about this like future child, that's like another like 3 to 6 months of just like finding the right person, finding the lawyer, and like and getting it all done. And like I'm 30, I'm gonna be 38 in April, and I'm already just thinking of like every time I tack on something that feels important, that's just like kicking it down the line another 6 months. And like thankfully my wife is a little younger than me, but it's just like, Jesus, if I need to like freeze some eggs, I better get going like yesterday. So it's wild, but
It is wild. And then it's not just about the ability to bear the child. It's like, do I want to be 50 with a 10-year-old? Like, this is a
Right.
thing. You know, do I have
Which
the
is, like-
energy for it?
and it's so much more normal now, right? Like especially, you know, within the comedy community to I feel like most of my friends who have kids had started in their late 30s or like
Yes.
had a kid at 40. Thank God. We're not gonna like be the only ones. But yeah, it is something to think about. I mean, I feel like grateful that I think, you know, it's cliche, but like 50 is gonna be the new 40 when we're 50.
Yes.
But it does seem exhausting. Like I am exhausted now without kids.
Yes.
I don't know how you do it. Like, I don't know how you just, like, tack on that additional thing onto life already. And, yeah.
It is impossible, and you just do it. Like, that's kind of the thing. Like, it just has to be done, and so you do it. And you find that, you know, for example, I only recently night weaned my baby, which is to say I stopped breastfeeding her at night. I just spent a week feeling like I have rockets attached to my legs. It's very exciting to have that many calories available to my brain. But I have an app that tracks when I feed her, just out of interest mainly, because then, you know, if she feeds less often or she feeds more often, I'm enjoying that part of it. And if you go, why is she so cranky? Oh, it's been X number of hours. But I can tell you for a fact that for 13 months, I didn't get more than 3 hours of sleep at a time. Yeah. Now, if you'd asked me whether that would have been possible 3 years ago, I would have said, no, I would die. But apparently you can do it, and fine, you know, it's fine. You do it. It's not the best you've ever felt in your life. But, you know, also I had her in the bed with me, which meant that I didn't have to, like, wake up and get up each time, which meant that I probably night fed her for longer than somebody who would have to get up or not. Like, it's just, you just make all these different little calculations, and these like logistical calculations, probably very boring to a listener who's not contemplating children, but it's fascinating because you're creating this balance between the baby's needs and your well-being, and consequently the baby's well-being. Like, if you're at a point where you're going to absolutely like flip it if the baby wakes you up one more time, then you got a night wean. And
Right.
like these kind of benefits and detriments to your baby and to you and to like the whole system and to your relationship with your partner and your relationship with the world and your relationship with your work, it just becomes a moving calculation.
Yeah, for sure. And like it's I mean, of course, nowadays with like everyone telling you what you should do, it's like if you were just like living in just like the middle of nowhere, somewhere in Siberia, you would just like go with like you would just go with the flow and do what feels right, but like just with all that added layer of shit on top of it, it just makes it so much harder because I'm sure people are like, oh, you shouldn't night wean, you shouldn't have them sleep with you in the bed for like stupid reason XYZ. But you know, it's like, who are you gonna listen to? Like yourself or some guy?
So it was really interesting because I'm kind of on the spectrum of like, get him out of the bed and put him in a job as quickly as possible, to like milk and love, the baby's always right. I'm probably more on the milk and love end of that spectrum. And I was in the hospital after giving birth, and they were like, oh, we have to put the baby in a crib next to you. You can't have the baby in the bed with you for legal reasons, but you can feed them. And like every nurse that came in was like, but if you are going to put the baby in the bed with you, this is the way to do it most safely.
Wow.
You know, so for like liability legal reasons, they can't let you sleep in the bed with the baby. And there are all these like statistics, but like basically a lot of the risks disappear if you take out like 3 major risk factors. And so, like being on drowsy making medication, etc. There's a few elements where I was just like, this is a risk I'm willing to take, because if the baby is in the crib, I am awake looking at the baby. Right. And I need to sleep. So the baby is going to be tucked in, and I'm going to like Google the position to be in, and it'll be fine. Probably.
It'll be fine, honestly. See, like, I don't know if this is like my true toxic trait, but I think my toxic trait is thinking like I could figure that out and like fuck whoever's telling you what to do or whatever the law is saying. And like, you can just figure it out and read between the lines. I mean, isn't that the beauty of Reddit after all?
Yes, but, that is the beauty of Reddit. Raise your child according to the tenets of Reddit, I think. Go for it.
You'll only go down a few conspiracy theory holes, but it's fine, they'll just grow up a flat earther or something. But no, I mean, you really can, like, there's, a lot, you can't just paint such a broad brush on something that's so personal and so specific to an individual parent and child. But yeah, with that extra layer, it's like, even my straight friends who are exactly the same age as me and obviously have the luxury of birth control have the burden of just overthinking this too much, just like me. And, I recently kind of realized I'm, like, not alone in being like, but this and that and this. Like, a lot of my straight friends are still thinking that, and are just like, I think we'll just get it figured out in another 2 years. We just have to buy that house that no one can afford right now and get settled, and then everything will be perfect. And it's just, I just don't think that's going to happen necessarily.
So when my mom was pregnant with us, this like family legend is Dad said, don't we need like a crib or something? And my mom said, we'll just pull out a drawer and put some towels in it. Like,
right.
You figure it out. Well, the things that you think that your child needs are not things that your child needs. The things that your child needs are just like you and the marrow of your bones, basically. Almost all of the like parental devices are there to substitute for parental attention. And I don't mean that in a way that denigrates their value, because we now live in a world where it's very difficult to have one person staying at home and putting all of their energy and juice into the children. And so you will probably find yourself using some of these tools. But I mean, when I say tools, I mean things like a pram is a substitute for you carrying the baby, and you're not going to just like carry the baby everywhere because we're not that buff anymore as a species. But like, it is a substitute for having the baby on your body, and you do miss something. And I say this as somebody who has a pram and uses a pram. Some of the things that I feel really privileged to have experienced are things that I had when I was traveling and didn't have a pram. So I was in Manchester with the baby strapped to my chest facing outwards, and I heard, she loves reading books, I've been reading her lots of books, there was a puppy in her book, and I was talking about the dog in the book, and we were just walking along in the street, and I heard her go, ugh, and her little body like recoiled into me, and I could see from her eyeline that what she'd done was she'd seen a dog, and she had connected the dog that she saw with the dog in the book. And it was, developmentally, have a little app that tells you the developmental stage, and that was appropriate for the thing. She was connecting this word cloud, dog, the picture of the dog, a real dog, and they were all the same thing. And I felt that in her little body, and that, like, I'm so delighted.
That's so
and I wouldn't
sick.
I wouldn't even notice that if she were in a pram.
It's like she saw a celebrity. That's amazing.
Oh my God, she's so into dogs, and she now is like, she'll see a dog and just be like, they're real.
Can I take a selfie? That's so amazing. And yeah, it just like, I mean, I laugh because I found this like Twitter account that was just going way too hard on, okay. I agree. It's like a no strollers Twitter, and like all they ever tweet about is how bad strollers or prams are. And I was like, I kind of agree, but then I realized they also are like weirdly right-wing and Trumpy, and I'm like, oh God, it's like this weird intersection of kind of like, close-knit parenting and all that, and going back to the basics, but also has like weird intersections with politics that weird me out. But all that said, I'm with you there. Like, I think that like being separate from, like, I don't think that we were designed to be physically separate from our kids in that way. And I also don't think they were designed to just be sitting, like, for hours a day.
Yes.
It's just, like, training them to, I guess, be, like, office workers. But, yeah, I was like, oh, go ahead.
That kind of intersection, this is the problem, right? Because you talk about these things and good, like, there's an inherent, like, moral judgment of, like, this is a good way to do it. And that's tricky because you have that, like, trad wife kind of right-wing group of people there. And then you also have your own kind of needs as a person and as a wage earner and as a worker, as well as being a parent. But you want to talk about it, and you want to talk about it in a way that doesn't make people feel judged and alienated. Because, of course, you're going to use a pram. Like,
right.
It's just, you also have to not lie to yourself about the cost, but also not exaggerate the cost, because it's like, quote unquote, a cost. Like, probably if a baby is never carried and only ever put in a pram for their whole life, there will be, like, serious psychological damage. But also, that's, you know, if it's like a pram for an hour a day, or like, it's like, you have to be realistic, I think. There's a kind of I'm not articulating this very well.
No, yeah, it's like use it as a tool, not a crutch, right?
Yeah, but also it's like people who are obsessive about their child only eating, like, organic food.
Yeah.
And that's more expensive and more laborious, and they, you know, spend hours making these incredible smoothies for their child, and their child never touches anything toxic or artificial or whatever it happens to be. I reckon that kid's going to end up more messed up.
Oh, yeah.
In many ways. And equally, the parent who's only ever feeding their child chicken nuggets, that's a child that's going to end up severely messed up. And there's some place in between those two where you are a normal human being about it, where you're like, yeah, I'll try and make sure that the food is organic if I can get my hands on it, or if it's cheap, or if, you know, whatever it is, you find that balance, or you don't believe in organic food, and whatever it is. But if you're the person who thinks that, so for example, I had this idea that I wouldn't give my child sugar until they were at least 1, and I had this idea of at her first birthday present she'd have some cake and it would blow her tiny mind. And then when she was 11 months old, I was in Florence in Italy, and she was eating pasta with her hands while sitting on my lap. Sweet. And I thought, I'm a great parent. And the owner of the restaurant came along, was charmed by my charming baby, and said, oh, I've got this sweet that I've just made, this little biscuity thing, and gave her the biscuit. And she shoved it straight in her mouth, and I was like, cool. Like,
That's
it's a month early on my schedule. I'm not going to, like, whack it out of her hands. This is a great experience.
Yeah. That's,
you know?
beautiful. Yeah, you know, like I guess the thing that everyone talks about is, like, iPads and screen time and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, obviously I don't want my kid, like, relying on an iPad or my phone or anything like that. And I don't even want to, like, model that behavior in front of them. But on the flip side, like, I think maybe the equivalent when we were growing up was, like, who had cable or not. And, like, the kids who kind of grew up without cable TV, like, lost out on so much pop culture reference and stuff that, like, it's kind of, like, important to my job now to have that. So I don't want a kid to just be, like, completely cut off from society like that, but also not addicted to it, right? Yeah, it's just about finding the balance.
So apparently the statistical data is mainly out of 2 studies from Canada. I'm going to tell you this because my brother is a nerd and sent me all this data. Basically, you kind of want to keep them more or less away from screens until they're 2, except for, like, FaceTime calls with friends or family members, because that's, like, interactive. Anything with cuts that are shorter than 3 seconds is, like, confusing to their brains. It sort of sedates part of their brain and overstimulates another part of their brain. And if you watch more than an hour, so it's like per hour of television that you watch per day, or per hour of screen time that you have per day, there's, like, a 10% increased chance of attention deficit stuff. But you think about people who are, like, children, babies, who are watching more than an hour of television a day. That's probably a circumstance where, like, the parents are, like, stressed out, working so much they don't have time to pay attention to the kid. Like, that's not a likely circumstance.
Right.
For I mean, I don't know you, but also, you know, maybe one day you have to put the kid in front of the television for 2 hours. I don't think that's a make or break thing. It's like if you're doing it for 2 hours every day.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, again, it's like, of course my kid should watch a movie, like, of course, but yeah, I mean, I watched this documentary on Barney. Did you guys have Barney in Australia?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
I was not allowed to watch TV as a kid at all, so...
No. Oh, you were on it. So, wait, do you have, like, regrets over that, or are you glad you didn't watch TV?
I have regrets to a certain extent in that. We were occasionally allowed to watch movies. We watched sort of the same 6 movies. It was a weird handful. One was like I Know Where I'm Going, which was a weird black and white movie. It was like a romance movie where a lady went to an island, but it had Gaelic in it because my mom was studying Gaelic, and so that was one of the movies that we watched like 8 million times. And there was like Singing in the Rain and Fantasia and Guys and Dolls, and like it was just such an odd mix of things. So those are the movies we were allowed to watch. At a certain age, we were allowed to watch one television show a week, and this is where my regrets begin, which was that the television show we watched, I don't know why, was Hercules with Kevin Sorbo. And then I think because it was advertised in the same time slot, we then chose to watch Xena. That was our show.
Of course.
And then at some point it was The Adventures of Lois and Clark. And again, I think it was just because there were ads in that time slot for the thing. And then it was Gladiators, the fighting game where they had like normal people going up against.
Yeah, American Gladiators, right?
Yeah,
that was such what a time in TV that was.
Yeah, but yeah, I like that. I had no idea what was on TV, and I don't know why. I assume it was like a 7:30 p.m. time slot, so it was available to us, but. That was my early television education.
That was your culture. Yeah, I mean it's such a weird thing. Like I mean with like kids shows. I mean I guess like any TV is good just to like again understand story and like basic things like that. I feel like there's some value in that. But the screwed up thing about kids television is it actually just like it's designed not to have a story or something that like a kid can like learn to internalize and repeat. It's designed to just like not let their eyeballs stray from a screen. And they started doing this, I guess Barney was like the groundbreaking TV show back in the 80s and the 90s where they would focus group all these like 3-year-olds. And anytime a kid would like look away from the screen, if there was like a sound over there, they'd be like, oh, we fucked up. Like we need to rework this segment to make it more captivating and keep their eyeballs on it, which is so dark and has no redeeming value other than, I guess, not having your kid bother you. But again, I'm not even saying that with judgment. I mean, like, cut to me 3 years from now and... My kids will be watching Dancing Bananas on YouTube for 3 hours. I have no idea.
The new monster is Coco Melon, just as a heads up. But this is the other thing, is like, I'm thinking about whether I'm going to introduce television to my child, and there is a temptation, slight but real, to just introduce her to things chronologically, like start her on silent film and her child.
I like that. Start with the train film that we all like learned in like Film 101 where it's from like 1908 or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then like Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and like all about hedonistic level that she doesn't learn to like enjoy these like jazzy heights. I think maybe that's kind of one of my vague parenting philosophies is like no bingly bangly jingly jangly like overstimulation things because she's just got a face. Like she's just had a face for the first time. She's not like a jaded New York socialite who needs to have her toes tickled with feathers while eating caviar. You can just show her. So one of the things is like flying between here and England. It's a 24-hour flight. So I break my screen rule. But like what I do to break the screen rule is I just show her a live stream of a fish tank.
That's great.
And she loves it. It's like, so in my head, it's like looking through a window. It's not really a screen. You know, like I've got this elaborate justification for my own bizarre moral principles that I have for no real reason. But she loves the fish tank. She'll watch that for like 15 minutes and then go back to her favorite plane pursuit, which is walking down the plane, looking at people until they look at her and then waving and going, hello.
Oh, that's a good gig. Yeah.
So she'll be quite patient. Someone's on their phone or whatever. She'll just wait them out until their eyes flick up, and then she'll catch their attention. Nom, 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 use it to feed her little brain.
That's adorable. Wow. Wish you were on my flights. That's so cool. Yeah, it's such a weird screen time. I know it's like everyone talks about it far too much, but there is something, I think like your plan, it seems, is like the best case to like keep your kid from being depressed at 12, right? Because it's just like all of these kids who like get a phone so early, like they're just overstimulated and sad and like have no meaningful interaction with the physical world, and it just bums me out so much.
Well, it's one of those things as well of like part of being a parent is like confronting the things about yourself that are crutches and the things about yourself that are suboptimal, and like my disassociative habit of when I'm under stress of just like plunging into a fantasy novel and just reading it for the entire series over the course of a week and never talking to anybody. Like that is no longer available to me. So when I'm stressed out, I actually have to deal with it. And so half of parenting is parenting yourself and like actually just being forced to sew up all those things that you've had like patches on for years. I think that's probably the hardest thing as well, of just like, yeah, okay, so I reach for my phone too often and I don't want her to see that, so I have to become a better person. Oh God.
Yeah, right.
What a nightmare.
I know, it keeps you honest. But I mean, at least you have that self-awareness. I don't think a lot of people do, but there's also that like thing of like where you overcorrect anything that happened that your parents did to you, and you're like, my kid is never gonna know what it's like to talk about bodies or like, you know, pant sizes or something like that. I don't know what that is for other people, but yeah, I'm always like, am I just gonna overcorrect everything too hard? Because you know, like,
I mean, this is totally a thing, and you realize that your parents were doing that as well. Like that's a weird insight that like my dad was weirdly distant when we got emotional, which felt like emotional abandonment at the time, because his mum was an adrenaline junkie who'd survived the Holocaust. So she loved a fight, and when she lost her temper, she would just scream and throw things. So he's like, I'm never going to scream and throw things, which meant that if we got upset, he would just blank us, you know? Which to me, I'm like, I'm never going to leave my child to like be upset on its own. I like, you just have to like, you have to figure it out as you go.
Totally. And I mean, like, that's such a good point too, because so much of it depends on the child and how like they end up reacting to that. Because like one kid could be like, oh great, I loved that my dad was so calm, and someone else would like just has a need to like have an emotional exchange that, you know, could be healthy. And it's such a crapshoot there.
Yeah, I'm genuinely so proud that my dad never raised his voice to us. And also, if anybody ignores me, I think I'm in trouble. Like,
yeah. I mean, it's a wild thing. I had an ex, and an ex who was neurotypical and had like some trouble with dealing with like her mother and her sister, because her mother and her sister got along so well that it was actually traumatic for her. And what I mean, I think we all collectively slowly realized was her mother was very autistic and her sister was very autistic, and it was like just that alone, just them being themselves, was perfectly fine for them and really traumatic for my ex. And it's just a really, I mean, again, it's just like the luck of the draw that you could just existing can be traumatic for them, or the best thing in the world.
Yeah, I have a friend who only had sisters, and she's only had sons, and she's really upset about it because she doesn't know how to relate to boys or how boys ought to relate to each other, or, you know, because she's so, I think everyone vaguely wants to give their children the good version of their own childhood.
Yeah.
Like the same as what they had, but with all of the bad bits taken out.
Right. But yeah, how do you apply that to this like other entire like culture, I guess? And if you can even say that, like, you know, little boys have a culture of their own. I wouldn't even know. I mean, I grew up really as an only child. I just have a half brother, but I don't have any idea how to relate to any siblings at all. No idea. And so it's just it's a weird discussion to have with my wife, because, you know, she has a brother and can't imagine what life is like without one.
Oh yeah,
like, of course we're gonna.
I'm a twin, and it's just us. But I was like, when I found out I was only having one child, I was like, but how do you would they be lonely? Like I didn't know how to process the concept of a lone child. It's so strange.
Everyone thinks it's the worst thing in the world, but it's like, it teaches you how to be alone with yourself so well. Like, I do wish my parents, like, let me hang out a little more. Like, I think my mom was just, like, too lazy to, like, drive me to a friend's house or something, because we were in the suburbs. But you really learn to be alone with yourself so well. And, well, it's not always the greatest. It has some value. But, like, yeah, it's like they're not going to, like, grow up to be psychopaths. Anyway, I really do think that our generation is mostly going to have only children, or just, like, way more only children than we've ever seen before. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when they're all, like, 10 or 15.
Yeah, and I think, you know, with one of kind of, to step away from children, generally there's, like, this loneliness epidemic. But I think that's more to do with technology than only childhood. You know, I think you can provide enough of a facsimile of what socializing does for you that you can fill your mouth while starving to death, in terms of what's actually, part of what's actually nourishing about other people is their difficulty. That it's difficult to live with people, it's difficult to be around people, you have to go out of your way, you have to go to a party that you don't really enjoy, or stay longer than you would like, or listen to someone's boring story, or put up with their weird idiosyncrasy about never cleaning the spoons right, or whatever it is. All of those things are difficult. And the internet sort of cultivates this feeling that engagement should be frictionless or pleasurable, that you should be able to have universally enjoyable experiences, because if you're not enjoying the video you're watching, you can click out and watch something else. But there's something about that labor of being around other difficult people that I think is really important.
It's kind of like the entry fee for meaningful connection, right? It's like, that's the cost of it, because we can always get that idealized form somewhere online. Like, even, you know, it's similarly affected how people have sex, and just how, like, there's been too many, like, idealized situations that, like, nothing real is ever good enough. But yeah, it's so hard, because it is just like, everything we put in our mouths, again, nothing to do with sex, but I mean, just like the empty calories of these easy exchanges are so, like, it takes work to not feel alone at this point, because all the ingredients for loneliness are just being shoved in our face. Like, it really just takes work to push them aside a little bit and make room for those connections. And it's exhausting, like, right? Like, I was just thinking, like, had to go to a party alone, and I wanted to die. Like, I just wanted to die going alone, but I put on my best face and just, like, had some drinks, and these people invited me to Costa Rica next week, so I'm going to Costa Rica with them. Like, it's just super random, but I'm just like, wow, if that wasn't, not that that's, like, meaningful connection, but no. I'm like, okay, it's just like, it's just one moment of discomfort, like, can lead to so many better things. But
and also, when you have a kid, you feel this really strongly, that there's a segment of people who think that children should exist outside of life, that you're kind of shunted into this parenting bubble, which is partly built out of a kind of a Victorian idea of the purity of childhood. Children shouldn't be in, like, dirty human spaces, they should be in a special imaginary childhood space. And also, get that annoying child off the train, it's annoying me. It shouldn't be in a cafe, it shouldn't be in public, it shouldn't be in my eye line, because it's inconvenient. And you see that extending out to, like, disabled people and old people. You create your little silos so you don't have to confront them, because it's difficult and it's hard and it's sad and it's inconvenient. And the outcome is things like COVID denial, because there's a special place for sick people, and they just disappear into that special place and you never see them again.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, like, I don't know if this, like, if it's like this in Australia, but, like, our infrastructure in New York kind of ensures that that's going to happen unless you take active measures otherwise. Like, I live in a neighborhood where everyone is like me because of the price point. And it's just like, of course, everyone is like exactly between 30 and 40 and about to have kids or has young kids. And there's like very little difference from that because of just like the way housing is structured, and like bars and restaurants are located, which is just like
and the way schools are run. It's super weird to have all of your society be 40 other children of exactly the same age. That's deeply unnatural, you know. And you miss something from not having friends who are 5 years older and for not having friends who are 10 years younger. I think, you know, my theory is that like significant proportion of the problems of adolescence would be solved if every teenager had to look after a 5-year-old 3 days a week. You know?
Yeah. Right. And that's how we grew up. Like, we would play in the neighborhood, and I don't know if that really happens anymore. Like, all I've heard is there's play dates, but I'm like, we never had play dates. We just went outside and waited for a kid to just go outside too, you know? But yeah, or you'd get like, you know, babysat by grandma or something, but it just, you know, now grandma lives 1,000 miles away in Florida.
Yeah, you can FaceTime with grandma if she can figure it out.
Yeah.
I should wrap this up, or start to wrap this up. This has been really good. I normally sort of know people before I have them on Tea with Alice. It's unusual for me to have someone on who I've never met before. This has been so nice. I feel like I'm getting to know you, and partly it's very nice because I am a big fan of your work. I really like Reductress. But where can people find you and support you online?
You can find me kind of all over the internets at Your Pappalardo. That's just Y-O-U-R, my last name. And you can check out Reductress at Reductress on all the social medias.
That is so wonderful. Thank you for having tea with me.
It was a pleasure.
Oh, do you know her or do you not? This dolphin mistress we have got. Elsie Thompson, it is her name, and she helps the dolphins at every frame. Lousy rifle doll.